Esther Blake, a 72-year-old widow, sat every night by her living room window, quietly watching her neighborhood's quiet street. His eyes, still sharp despite the years, scanned every corner of Maple Street, where he had lived for decades. Although it had always been a street of peace and tranquility, lately something disturbing was in the air. Each night, a sleek black car glided silently down the street, stopping at the run-down garage at the end of the block. At the wheel was Victor Langston, a man who had once been a symbol of success and generosity in the community. However, now he seemed to be shrouded in an aura of mystery. Next to him was a girl of no more than 8 years old, Lila, always dressed in a vibrant yellow dress, which stood out against the darkness of the night. His face, innocent and full of secrets, aroused a growing uneasiness in Esther. As she watched the peculiar couple disappear into the garage, Esther's curiosity turned to concern. What would Victor Langston, someone so well known for his fortune and generosity, do in that ramshackle place, night after night, and always in the company of such a young girl? The presence of both disturbed the air of serenity in the neighborhood, leaving a shadow of doubt and whispers among the residents. Esther couldn't ignore that feeling of unease, and the more time she spent watching them from her window, the more convinced she became that something strange was going on in Victor and Lila's lives. However, she did not yet imagine that her search for answers would lead her to discover secrets that would change not only her perception of the community, but also her life. For days, Esther watched Victor and Lila's movements intently. Every evening, the black car arrived like clockwork. Without anyone in the neighborhood paying much attention, the vehicle glided silently into the garage, whose worn doors opened with a screech that disappeared into thin air. Victor and Lila disappeared inside and were not seen again until dawn. Esther had come to recognize every detail of this routine, from Victor's impeccable blue suit to the melancholy expression in Lila's eyes, a look too gloomy for a girl her age. Despite the speculations that began to arise in Esther's mind, the two didn't seem to hurt, but the situation itself was strange, unsettling, and anxiety grew with each passing night. As Esther spent more and more time at her observation post by the window, her immediate surroundings began to notice her behavior. Nancy, a close neighbor and friend of Esther's for years, laughingly told her about her new hobby of always being by the window. Frank, a retired mail carrier who had a reputation for not taking anything too seriously, joked about his neighborhood watch and compared it to his past campaigns to control loose dogs or missorted trash. However, Esther barely listened to his comments. She was too focused on the mystery that absorbed her. When Victor and Lila appeared, everything else in his life took a back seat. One afternoon, Esther decided to mention her concerns to her friends at the community center's book club. Surrounded by neighbors who chatted animatedly about trivial topics, Esther took advantage of a pause to express her doubts. "I've noticed something strange lately," he began, trying to gauge his friend's reaction. "Have you seen that black car that arrives every night at the end of the street? The one who carries that man and the little girl?" Immediately, the eyes of Frank, Nancy, and Carla, the young mother of two who also frequented the group, became curious. But, as Esther described Victor and Lila's nightly routine, she noticed that her friends seemed more confused than alarmed. Nancy was the first to speak. "Victor Langston? The same man who helped the Johnsons keep their house when they were in trouble. He is known for being generous. Maybe he's just helping the girl or her family." Frank nodded, laughing loudly through the room. "Esther, my dear, I don't see the mystery. The rich sometimes do weird things. Perhaps he is hiding a treasure or secretly helping. Why see it as something sinister?" But Esther could not put aside her concern. He looked at their faces and saw the mixture of skepticism and a hint of amusement in their expressions, as if they were entertained with their concern. That night, Esther decided to go out on the street just before Victor's black car showed up. Pretending to water the plants in the garden at twilight, he waited for the car to stop and watched it closely. He noticed that Victor was getting more and more tired. His suit no longer looked the same flawless as before. His face, always carefully shaved and composed, now seemed to show signs of stress and wear and tear. Lila, on the other hand, kept her yellow dress always clean, but there was something in her eyes, a shadow of sadness or worry that made Esther feel a pang in her heart. What could be happening? Victor's protective gestures toward the girl seemed genuine, but the mystery of the garage and the isolation of both continued to increase his doubts. Little by little, the subject became heavier for Esther, who every night continued to wait by the window, watching how Victor and Lila entered and left the garage. One night, unable to bear it anymore, he decided to do something he had never done before. As he watched them head to the garage, he plucked up the courage, left his house, and walked to the car just as they closed the door. However, before he could say anything, a sound of footsteps echoed in the street. Victor turned his head and saw her standing, still and watching him. For a second, his expression was one of surprise, followed by a mixture of alarm and frustration. Without saying a word, he and Lila rushed into the garage, leaving Esther standing on the sidewalk with her heart pounding and her head full of questions. That experience left her deeply disturbed. The next morning, as he looked at his reflection in the mirror, he saw an older woman, but her spirit rejuvenated by unwavering determination. Determined to get answers, she spent several days going through the small details of her observations, arming herself with all the clues she had collected. He looked beyond the obvious: Victor's gestures, Lila's tired posture, the rare visitor who had once arrived, and had a tense conversation with Victor. Now I had a suspicion that there was something deeper in the relationship between them, and that Victor was in a complicated situation. Despite comments and laughter from neighbors who downplayed her suspicions, Esther began to come up with a plan. Instead of simply staying at the window, he decided to follow Victor and Lila, always at a safe distance, to see if he could discover more about the truth behind this enigma. She was ready to move beyond the superficial glances and rumors of the neighborhood. He knew that if something dark was occurring, it was his responsibility to find out. And if she was wrong, at least she would have peace of mind knowing that she did everything she could to help. On a particularly cold night in November, Esther decided to take her plan a step further. He waited until Victor's car left the garage, and after a few moments of preparation, ventured to follow it on foot, staying in the shade. Her heart pounded as she slipped through the trees and stayed close enough to watch without being seen. The night breeze chilled her cheeks, but fear and adrenaline kept her alert and determined. Victor's car drove too, as on previous occasions, to the local park, where he and Lila sat on a bench in a lonely corner. From behind an oak tree, Esther could watch as Victor and Lila sat in a silence that seemed more charged with tension than peace. Lila snuggled up next to Victor, as if seeking comfort, and he covered her with his coat, a paternal gesture that made Esther's heart soften a little. However, there was something about the way he looked around, as if he was waiting for something, or someone, that reminded him that the situation wasn't that simple. Esther noticed the way his shoulders remained tense, as if at any moment he was ready to get up and flee. This only reinforced the feeling that they were both wrapped up in some sort of secret, one that was slowly suffocating them. That same night, as she returned home and settled into her armchair, Esther thought about all the details she had accumulated in her mind. She recalled the conversation with her friends at the book club, who had tried to persuade her that Victor was just secretly helping someone. But now, after what he had seen, he couldn't deny that there was a heavy emotional burden between Victor and Lila, something he was hiding and that the girl carried with her every time he saw her. Esther was caught between two thoughts: the possibility that she was exaggerating, or the certainty that her instinct, after so many years, did not deceive her. The next morning, on her usual walk to the community center, Esther met Nancy and Carla, who, in a nonchalant tone, asked her how her research was going. Although in other times Esther would have laughed along with them, this time she simply looked at them seriously. "There's more to it than you think," she told them, surprising her friends. Nancy raised an eyebrow, noticing the change in Esther's tone. Carla, with a slight nervousness, tried to divert the conversation to something lighter, but Esther maintained her position. "They may think I'm exaggerating, but I've seen things that can't be easily explained. Something is happening, and I'm not going to ignore it," he concluded. That night, Esther decided to do something even bolder. Arming himself with a small flashlight, he put on a scarf to protect himself from the cold and walked out of his house with a firm step. heading straight for the ruined garage. His plan was to examine the place more closely, to see if he could find any signs or clues that would give him a hint of what Victor and Lila were doing there every night. When she arrived, she made sure no one saw her and slipped to the side of the garage, where she crouched near a dusty window and tried to look inside. The little light filtering in from inside showed a surprisingly tidy space, with a few blankets folded in a corner and a few belongings neatly arranged. Esther could make out the shadows of what appeared to be stacked books and some simple toys. This discovery made her shudder. It seemed that, despite everything, Victor was trying to give Lila as normal a life as possible, although in circumstances that were obviously not the best. This look inside only reinforced his empathy and concern. Victor and Lila weren't there on a whim. Suddenly, a noise in the doorway startled her, and she quickly retreated into the shadow, pressing herself against the wall. The garage door slowly opened, and Victor appeared in the doorway, his figure silhouetted by the light inside. Esther held her breath, fearing she'd discover it, but Victor seemed too deep in his own thoughts to notice any movement outside the garage. She watched as he checked his watch, and then cast a quick, wary glance at the street, as if he were waiting for someone to show up. That was the final sign to Esther that she couldn't go on without involving someone else. That same night, when she returned home, Esther sat down at her desk and began to write a detailed letter, in which she described everything she had observed about Victor and Lila. She knew that the police would probably regard her as a worried old lady, but she was willing to take the risk. I couldn't keep this a secret any longer. The image of Lila, with her worn yellow dress and dejected gaze, pushed her to act. After finishing the letter, Esther left it ready to take to the police station the next morning. She was somewhat relieved to see her thoughts and observations on paper. It was as if he had finally managed to organize his concerns and transform them into concrete actions. As she closed her eyes that night, she told herself that she had done the right thing. However, I knew that this story was far from over. The next morning, Esther woke up early with a renewed determination to take her letter to the police station. She calmly prepared herself, wearing her thickest coat and making sure to carry the letter well protected in her purse. However, just as she was about to leave, a sound in the street made her stop. He went to the window and, to his surprise, saw Victor's car parked at the end of the street, well before its usual hours. Something was not right. She watched intently as Victor got out of the car, looking around nervously, and then helped Lila out of the vehicle. The girl looked even sadder than usual. Her yellow dress now looked worn and wrinkled, as if it hadn't been washed in several days. Esther felt a twinge of concern. Why were they there so early? What had brought them back when they normally didn't show up until late at night? Victor quickly walked to the garage with Lila by his side, but before they could enter, an unknown figure appeared at the end of the street. He was a tall, burly man, dressed in a dark suit that contrasted with the calm of the neighborhood. Esther watched as the man walked toward Victor with a firm step, his posture threatening. The two stopped a few feet away and began to talk, though their voices were barely a murmur from where Esther stood. The tension in the air was palpable. Esther pursed her lips, debating whether to step out and confront the man or stay in his place. She knew she couldn't intervene without risking exposure, but her concern for Lila pushed her to do something. She saw how Victor tried to calm the man, who was gesturing angrily, pointing towards Lila on a couple of occasions. It was evident that the girl's presence did not please him, and with every word Victor seemed to grow smaller, almost defeated. After a few minutes of argument, the man finally walked away, throwing one last menacing glance at Victor before leaving. Victor stood, staring at the ground, as if all his energy had vanished. Then, taking Lila's hand, he guided her into the garage. Esther knew she had to do more than just watch from a distance. It was time to confront Victor and find out the truth. Esther waited until the street was completely clear, and with firm steps, she approached the garage. Before he could hesitate, he gently knocked on the door. From inside, he heard a faint sound of movement, and soon after, the door opened just enough for Victor to poke his face out. At the sight of her, his expression quickly changed from surprise to something that looked like exhaustion. Without saying anything, he gestured for her to come in. The inside of the garage was cold and dark, barely lit by a small lamp. Esther could see a mattress on the floor, some blankets and messy toys. Lila was sitting in a corner, looking at her curiously, but also with an obvious sadness in her eyes. Esther turned her attention to Victor, who seemed to be expecting some question, some accusation. Esther took a deep breath before speaking. "Victor, I've been watching. I'm worried about you and Lila," he began bluntly. "I've seen her many nights here, and I don't understand why someone like you, who has always been so generous, is hiding in this place instead of asking for help." Victor sighed, and after a brief silence, sat down in a box near her, running a hand over his face, visibly tired. "Esther, you don't know how much this weighs on me," she finally confessed. "Everything I've done, I have done it to protect Lila. I lost everything I had, the business, the house, and with that, I lost everyone's trust. No one imagines the weight of having gone from being someone respected to being on the run every day." Esther felt her shoulders slump, and in her eyes she could see a gleam of anguish. "But why didn't you seek help? This community has always considered you an admirable person," Esther insisted. Victor shook his head. "Pride, shame. I can't even explain it. I wanted to solve it alone, but with each passing day, I feel that the situation is more unsustainable. That man you saw, he is one of those who still persecute me for money that I have no way to pay." Esther felt a mixture of compassion and understanding. He understood how the weight of pride could keep someone silent. Seeing Lila, his heart softened. "I couldn't let this girl continue in those conditions, without the care and security she needed." He reached out, and in a soft voice offered Victor an alternative. "You don't have to live like this, Victor. If you stay at my house, we can find a way to deal with all of this. You and Lila will be safe while we look for a solution." Victor looked at her, incredulous, and for a moment with a glimmer of hope in his eyes. He knew there weren't many options, and Esther's offer seemed to be the only way out of the situation they faced. After a brief pause, he nodded. With a look of relief that needed no words, Victor agreed. That same night, Esther helped Victor and Lila carry their few belongings home. There wasn't much. A few blankets, some books and toys that Lila had accumulated in those difficult months. As they entered, Esther guided them to the small guest room she had hastily prepared. The room was simple, with a bed, a lamp, and a small chest of drawers, but in Lila's eyes, it was as if she was entering a palace. The girl, who had known nothing but the cold and the harshness of the garage, touched each object delicately, as if she feared that they would disappear instantly. Victor, for his part, stood in the doorway, watching silently as Lila settled into bed, where she finally smiled for the first time in weeks. Esther noticed the look in Victor's eyes, a mixture of gratitude and sadness. It was evident that he himself had not imagined reaching that point, but exhaustion and worry had finally given way to the need to accept help. Esther approached him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You'll be safe here, Victor. Take the time to think about what you need to do, but remember that you are not alone," he told her in a firm voice. The days that followed were a mix of new routines and adjustments for both Victor and Esther. He, accustomed to leading a life in which he was in control, suddenly found himself in a position where he needed support. At first, she had a hard time accepting even Esther's small gestures of kindness. However, little by little she opened up, sharing some of the worries and plans that had been put on hold when her life changed drastically. Lila also began to adapt, attending the local school, where she soon began to make friends and regain some of the joy of her age. One evening after dinner, Esther and Victor sat on the small back deck, where the cold autumn air was beginning to bring in the smell of dry leaves. Victor stared at the horizon in silence, and Esther could see that something was troubling him. After a long moment of silence, he finally spoke. "I never thought it would come to this, Esther. I always believed that I could handle it, that I didn't need anyone. And now I'm here, living thanks to the kindness of someone who barely knows me." Her voice cracked slightly, and Esther felt a surge of compassion for the man who had clearly been bearing an enormous weight for too long. "You're not the first, nor will you be the last to need help, Victor," she replied softly. "The important thing is that now you have a chance to start over. The past doesn't define what you can build now, and you don't have to do it alone. Lila needs you more than ever. So, While you're here, consider it your home." Victor nodded, and his eyes showed a mixture of gratitude and renewed determination. She knew that her mission was not only to get her own life back on track, but also to make sure that Lila had a secure and promising future. Over time, Esther became a kind of guide for Victor. It helped him organize his finances, deal with outstanding debts, and plan a budget that would allow him to gradually pay off the bills without putting his security at risk. Victor, with his experience in the business world, found in these small steps a way to rebuild his confidence and dignity. He even got a job at a local office, nothing glamorous but enough to start making peace with his situation. Meanwhile, Lila was blooming. The girl who had arrived frightened and quiet began to show a spark of life that filled Esther's house with a renewing energy. Esther helped her with her schoolwork and made sure she had time to play and just be a girl. With each laugh, each new discovery, Lila seemed to gradually forget the weight of the dark days she had spent in the garage with her father. One afternoon, while Victor was going over the bills with Esther in the kitchen, there was a knock on the door. Esther opened the door and found a serious-looking man who turned out to be a collection agent looking for Victor. Calmly, Esther explained that Victor was working to catch up on his debts and that a local lawyer was helping to mediate the process. The agent, though skeptical at first, seemed to be reassured by the firmness and determination in Esther's voice. After a brief exchange, the man left, leaving Esther and Victor a little calmer. That night, as they were about to have dinner, Victor turned to Esther with a tone of gratitude in his voice. "I don't know how to thank you, Esther. Everything you've ever done. You have given me the opportunity to save what is left of my life, to give Lila the childhood she deserves." Esther smiled and simply replied, "Victor, true gratitude is in seeing you both flourish here. That's all the gratitude I need." The weeks passed, and autumn began to give way to the first days of winter. The trees were bare, and Maple Street no longer held the same dark secrets that had once troubled Esther. Instead, a sense of hope, family, and strength filled their home. As she watched Lila run around the room with a beaming smile, and saw Victor working with determination to rebuild his life, Esther knew she had found something much deeper than she expected. Winter enveloped Maple Street in a cold, silent serenity, as a soft blanket of snow covered the sidewalks and bare trees. For Esther, that winter calm reflected the peace she now felt in her own home. Each day was a simple but meaningful routine. She woke up early to make breakfast, and the sounds of Lila and Victor filled the house in ways she could never have imagined. Those echoes of childish laughter and whispered conversations filled in the gaps left behind by the loss of her husband, and she found herself experiencing a kind of family she hadn't anticipated. One afternoon, when the snow began to fall again, Lila approached Esther with a sheet of paper in her hand, a drawing she had made in class. On the sheet appeared 3 figures, an older woman, a dark-haired man, and a little girl, all standing under a large tree. Esther felt a warm emotion as she recognized the representation of her small, improvised family. "It's you, Esther," Lila explained with a shy smile. "You are our grandmother." Those words resonated deeply in Esther, and she couldn't help but hug the girl tenderly, feeling how that simple drawing represented something bigger, a real connection, a bond that had grown without her noticing. Meanwhile, Victor also continued his process of change. With each passing week, he was able to stabilize his financial situation a little more, thanks to the modest job he had secured in a nearby office. He knew it wasn't the kind of position he was used to, but he accepted it with humility and determination, convinced that it was a step towards something better. Nightly conversations with Esther about budgeting, spending, and saving became a kind of ritual, a way to remind himself that he was moving forward, even if it was in small steps. However, one day when Victor came home, his face showed a mixture of anxiety and determination. He sat across from Esther in the kitchen and explained that he had received a call from the lawyer, who had informed him of an offer to settle part of his debts in exchange for a hefty down payment. It was an opportunity to close one of the largest accounts, but also a risk, since it involved using almost all the savings I had managed to accumulate in recent months. Esther listened to him in silence, and then offered her opinion with the same sincerity she had always shown. "Victor, You have worked hard to regain stability. If you think this is a legitimate opportunity, you should take it. But remember, no matter what, you'll always have a place here. You're not alone in this." Esther's words seemed to relieve some of the tension on Victor's face, who realized that, despite the uncertainties, he was not facing this decision alone. After deep reflection, he decided to follow Esther's advice and accepted the lawyer's offer, hoping that it would be the first real step towards a life free from the shadows of his old debts. The months continued, and as spring approached, life in Esther's house had been completely transformed. Lila became one of the most beloved students in her class, excelling in her studies and surrounded by new friends. The girls seemed to have blossomed in this safe and welcoming environment, and there wasn't a day that went by that she didn't bring home some art project or a funny story about her adventures at school. Every night after dinner, she would curl up next to Esther on the couch to read a book or just listen to the stories of her childhood, and in those moments, Esther felt her heart expand with a happiness she thought she had left behind years ago. Victor was also beginning to see the fruits of his labor. His modest job at the office allowed him to make progress on his payments, and although there was still a long way to go, each month he managed to pay off a little more of his debts. His bosses noticed his dedication and commitment and began to entrust him with additional responsibilities, small steps that represented his desire to rebuild his life from the ground up. One day, during a casual conversation, his supervisor mentioned the possibility of a promotion, something Victor would never have imagined at the beginning of his job. That night, he shared the news with Esther and Lila, and the small celebration that followed was a reminder that, despite all the difficulties, they were moving forward together towards a better future. Finally, the first anniversary of their life together arrived. Esther decided to organize a small dinner to celebrate, inviting Nancy, Frank, and Carla, who had been her close friends and witnesses to this unusual transformation in her life. As they prepared food together in the kitchen, Victor and Esther exchanged glances of complicity and gratitude, knowing that the night marked an important milestone. When the guests arrived, they all commented on the warm, familiar atmosphere that now permeated Esther's home. Frank even joked, saying that he had never seen Esther so happy and radiant, which caused laughter and smiles at the table. Over dinner, Lila proudly shared her accomplishments at school, while Victor spoke briefly about his work, omitting the difficult details and focusing on his gratitude for the new opportunity he had found. Esther, for her part, realized that she no longer felt like the distant, lonely observer she had been a year ago. Now she was surrounded by family, a kind of community that had formed in her home, and in the warmth of that dinner, she understood that the help she had offered Victor and Lila had not only transformed their lives, but also given her back a spark of life and purpose. With each shared laugh, with each story told around the table, Esther felt how the weight of her own losses and past silences dissolved. It wasn't just the solving of a mystery that had given new meaning to his life. It was an opportunity to share it, to provide comfort, and to receive, in equal measure, the affection of those whom I had decided to help without asking for anything in return. As the night of the celebration progressed and the group around the table was plunged into a joyful bustle, Esther couldn't help but smile when she saw Victor and Lila surrounded by their friends and enjoying a peace that only a year ago seemed impossible. Throughout the dinner, the faces of Frank, Nancy, and Carla reflected a heartfelt appreciation for the courage and generosity Esther had shown in opening her home to two people in distress. However, as they chatted about the events of the past year, Esther remained silent, reflecting on what had really changed in her. For Victor, this moment represented more than a celebration. It was a kind of rebirth. Now that she had begun to stabilize her finances and build a new life, she felt the burden of debt and worries lightening. Sitting next to Esther, he looked at her and realized how much he owed her, not only for her practical help, but for having given her a reason not to give up, to fight for a dignified life for him and for Lila. That night, as the bustle of dinner turned to quiet whispers, Victor spoke to Esther in a low voice. "Esther, I will never be able to express how much you mean to us," he began, his words filled with genuine emotion. "Thanks to you, Lila and I have found something we haven't had for a long time. A home. You have been more than a friend. You have been our salvation." Esther looked at him with a mixture of affection and humility, for she had never sought recognition. I had simply followed the impulse to help. "Victor, the gratitude is mutual. You and Lila have given me back a life I thought I had lost. Don't thank me, because you've also given me a family." Over the next few days, life returned to its usual course. Reading meetings, family dinners, and study nights with Lila became beloved and familiar routines. Gradually, Victor and Lila ceased to be guests and became permanent members of Esther's household. During that time, Lila thrived in her studies and social life, excelling in class and forming strong friendships. Her laughter and energy seemed to light up every corner of the house, and Esther could tell how Lila was beginning to consider the neighborhood, and even the house itself, as her true home. One afternoon, while Victor was returning from work, he found Esther waiting for him in the kitchen, her face beaming with a mixture of joy and surprise. She showed him an envelope that had arrived that morning, and with some emotion, explained that it was from Lila's school. Upon opening it, Victor discovered that it contained a letter informing that Lila had been selected for an awards ceremony for her outstanding academic performance and dedication. Victor's eyes filled with pride as Esther smiled tenderly. Lila's effort and the support they had given her together were paying off in ways they could never have imagined. The ceremony was held at the local school, and that day the small family arrived at the assembly hall feeling a mixture of nerves and excitement. When Lila's name was announced and she took the stage to receive her award, Esther and Victor exchanged a look that said more than any words could express. Esther, with tears of pride in her eyes, watched as the girl she had taken in as if she were her own granddaughter received her recognition in front of the entire school community. For Victor, that moment was confirmation that he had made the right decisions. The life he was building for him and Lila was solid and full of possibilities. The months continued to pass, and life in Esther's home became a series of small daily rituals. Weekends were filled with family activities, from walks to the park to visits to the community centre. Victor even began to participate in the book club meetings, to the surprise and delight of all the attendees. The community had welcomed them with open arms, and now Esther, Victor and Lila were an active part of that neighbourhood that had seen them transform into a real family. With the arrival of a new summer, Esther proposed organising an outdoor gathering in her garden, a celebration to thank all those who had been by her side during the year. Friends and neighbours came, bringing plates of food and laughter that filled the atmosphere with joy. In the midst of the bustle, Victor approached Esther and, with a solemn expression, handed her a small gift. When she opened it, Esther found a simple heart-shaped pendant, inside which had been engraved a word: family. Esther watched him in silence, moved by the gesture, and placed it on his neck while tears appeared in his eyes. At the end of the night, when everyone had left and the garden was silent in the moonlight, Esther, Victor and Lila sat on the porch, enjoying the fresh night air. Words were superfluous. In that shared peace, each understood how much their lives had changed and how lucky they were to have found each other. Esther looked at Lila, who was resting her head on Victor's shoulder and was filled with gratitude. He had started watching from his window, with doubts and suspicions, and now he had a family that reminded him that love and compassion could heal even the deepest wounds. Over the course of that year, Maple Street had changed forever. It was no longer a street of secrets and worries, but a place of meeting and second chances. And for Esther, Victor and Lila, the home they had built together was not simply a house. It was the symbol of unconditional love and new life, woven from the thread of their shared experiences. As the months went by, life in Esther's home took on a steady and comforting pace. Victor, increasingly settled in his work, began to be considered by his colleagues and superiors as an indispensable worker. His effort and commitment had not only given him a promotion, but had allowed him to recover a part of himself that he thought was lost. In each achievement, Victor felt the support of Esther and Lila, and that house that was once only a temporary refuge had become the true home they longed for. Lila, on the other hand, bloomed day by day. The girl who arrived with a look of sadness and concern was now an inexhaustible source of joy and creativity. The relationship between her and Esther became so close that any neighbour who saw them together could think that they were really grandmother and granddaughter. Lila loved spending her afternoons with Esther in the garden, learning how to take care of plants and prepare homemade recipes. Between laughter and games, Esther transmitted little life advice and values that, without a doubt, Lila would always carry with her. However, on an autumn afternoon, something unexpected happened. An elegant and distinguished-looking man arrived in the neighborhood and stopped in front of Esther's house. Victor, who had gone out to check the mailbox, saw him and recognized him immediately. He was the representative of one of the creditors who was still pursuing the traces of his past life. His first reaction was one of fear, but a glance at the window, where he saw Lila and Esther sharing a cup of tea in the kitchen, filled him with a calm he had never felt before. Determined to confront him, Victor approached the man and offered him a handshake. "I know why you're here," he said, with a firmness in his voice that surprised even himself. "And I'm willing to pay everything I owe, but I need you to know that I'm no longer the man who ran away from his problems. I'm rebuilding my life, and I have a family that depends on me." The man, who at first seemed ready to intimidate him, heard the conviction in Victor's words, and, after a pause, nodded. "We will keep in touch, Mr. Langston. We are more interested in you regaining your financial stability than in causing unnecessary trouble," he said, and after a brief exchange he left, leaving Victor with a renewed sense of freedom. That night, Victor shared the incident with Esther, who listened to it with a mixture of concern and pride. He told her about the fear he still felt about the decisions of the past, but also about the certainty that with his help and Lila's support, he would finally be able to overcome any obstacle. Esther offered him a warm smile, and in her gaze Victor found a deep confidence. "Victor," she said softly, "you have shown your bravery in many ways. This is just another step on the road, and you're not alone in facing it." Life went on, and Victor, now without the weight of his past, focused entirely on building a safe future for himself and Lila. Esther's support was fundamental in that process. Together, they managed to consolidate a savings fund and ensure a stable future for Lila, who was already beginning to talk about her dreams of becoming an artist or teacher. Esther encouraged those dreams, giving Lila all the love and support she could give her. Christmas that year was a memorable celebration. Esther's house was filled with lights and decorations, and she, Victor and Lila spent hours choosing and decorating a tree that they placed in the corner of the living room. On Christmas morning, between laughter and hugs, they exchanged small gifts. Victor gave Esther a photo album containing memories of their moments together since they arrived at their home. Esther, moved to tears, went through each page while Lila and Victor watched with smiles. For Esther, this was one of the most precious gifts she had ever received, a testament to the new life and love they had shared. At the end of the album, Esther hugged both of them and whispered, "Thank you for being my family. You have given me more than you could imagine." To Victor and Lila, those words meant everything. They had found a place in the world where they were accepted and loved unconditionally, something that had seemed impossible to them in times past. As the year progressed, the seasons changed, but the union and love that had formed between them remained constant. Victor, Esther and Lila had created something lasting, something nothing could undo. The Maple Street house was not just a dwelling, it was the symbol of kindness, resilience, and people's ability to heal and rebuild, not only their lives, but also their hearts. The following winter brought with it a quiet calm. Maple Street, once full of secrets, was now witnessing a story of second chances. Winter was advancing, and with it, the tranquility in Esther's home was becoming more and more consolidated. Maple Street was covered with a thin layer of snow, and the house was filled with warmth and laughter that made you forget the cold outside. Lila, who already considered Esther to be her grandmother at heart, spent her afternoons in the living room practicing her artistic skills. Esther had given her a set of colored pencils and notebooks so that she could unleash her creativity, and Lila took advantage of every moment to put her ideas on paper. One afternoon, while Victor was at work and Lila was drawing on the dining room table, Esther decided to take her to the attic to show her some of her own belongings and family memories. Among boxes full of old photos, books and memorabilia from the life she shared with her late husband, Esther pulled out an old music box that still worked. Soft, nostalgic music filled the attic, and Esther watched Lila's eyes light up as she listened to the melody. It was as if at that moment Lila and Esther shared something deep, a bond beyond words, a bond that made them something more than simply friends or acquaintances. They were family. As they returned to the first floor, Lila asked a question that surprised Esther. "Do you think I'll look like you when I grow up, Grandma?" she said, with the innocence and sweetness of her age. Esther smiled, feeling a mixture of joy and excitement. "Maybe not physically, Lila, but in the heart, I'm sure it is," she replied, caressing her cheek. For Lila, those words were an affirmation of something she had been feeling for a long time, that home and that family were now an essential part of who she was. For his part, Victor was also experiencing his own growth. In his work, his supervisors began to entrust him with projects of greater responsibility, and over time, his position cemented itself as one of the most respected in the office. The praise and recognition did not take long to arrive, but for him, the real achievement was being able to return home every night, to a place where he knew he was welcomed, valued, and, above all, loved. The stability she had achieved now allowed her to look to the future with hope, and every day she worked with the goal of giving Lila the life she deserved. One night, after dinner, Esther proposed to Victor and Lila a small family tradition that she used to share with her husband. It consisted of meeting by the fireplace and writing a list of wishes and goals for the following year. Victor and Lila, excited by the idea, took their sheets of paper and began to write. Lila, in her large, careful handwriting, wrote down her dreams of learning to paint better and of one day having a pet, a wish that made Victor and Esther laugh. For Victor, his goals were deeper and more personal. He wanted to make sure that Lila always had stability, and he also wished deep down to be able to give back to Esther some of the support and kindness she had given them. When they were done, Esther folded each paper and put them in a small wooden chest that she placed on the mantelpiece. "At the end of next year, we'll reopen it and see how many of these dreams came true," he explained with a smile. For them, that simple tradition symbolized more than an act of hope. It was a reminder that, despite the challenges, there was always a reason to look ahead. As the seasons passed, Esther's home continued to be a haven of peace and love. Lila became a well-known figure in the neighborhood, winning the affection of everyone for her sympathy and enthusiasm. Victor also became a beloved member of the community, actively participating in community center events and activities, showing everyone that he had left his past of hardship behind. And for Esther, every day was a gift. He had found in Victor and Lila a reason to move forward, to live with joy, and to rediscover love in its purest and most sincere form. When the following winter came, when they sat down once more by the fireplace and opened the wooden chest, each of them found that their desires and goals had been fulfilled in ways even better than they had imagined. For Lila, her ability for art had grown, and she now had plans to attend painting classes, with the support of Victor and Esther. Victor had managed to establish solid financial stability and had begun to make plans for Lila's future. And for Esther, life had given her back a family she could trust and love unreservedly. In that home on Maple Street, winter was no longer cold or lonely. Esther's house had been transformed into a place of warmth, a symbol of resilience and the power of kindness. Maple Street was now a refuge, a place where, against all odds, three people had found a new beginning and above all, a bond that bound them together beyond words. And so in the peace of that home, Esther, Victor and Lila continued, year after year, to share their life together, always remembering that second chances and true love can be found even in the most unexpected places. As the years continued to pass, Esther, Victor and Lila's lives continued to weave around warmth and shared moments in the Maple Street home. Each new season brought with it new experiences and challenges, but also new joys that strengthened the bond between them. Lila grew up surrounded by love and support, developing her talents and dreams with the confidence that both Victor and Esther gave her. Once just a temporary shelter, the house had become the mainstay of his small family. Victor, who had once been a man marked by hardship and the need to hide, was now a trusted figure in the community. His years of effort and work allowed him to move up in the company, and over time, he managed to open his own business, one dedicated to providing services to the local community. Inspired by Esther's unconditional support, he pledged to give back to those around him, helping those in need and becoming a model of perseverance. With each achievement, I saw reflected the power of second chances and those small acts of kindness that, like Esther's, have the power to transform lives. For Esther, the days were filled with a satisfaction and purpose she had never imagined. I enjoyed Lila's progress in school and every new project of Victor's, always reminding her how proud she was of her accomplishments. Over the years, Maple Street came to know her not only as an observant neighbor, but as the kind soul who, with quiet generosity, had helped cement the lives of two people in need of a home. Neighbors greeted her with affection, and many came to see her as the motherly and wise figure of the community. As Lila grew older, her artistic talents blossomed in surprising ways. Esther, who had always been her biggest admirer, organized small exhibitions in the living room of her house so that the neighbors could admire Lila's works. The accolades and acceptance from the community motivated her to continue perfecting her art, and by the time she reached adolescence, she had received several scholarships to support her further artistic studies. Victor, excited for his daughter's future, and Esther, proud of her granddaughter at heart, encouraged her to follow her dreams, giving her all the love and support that a united family could offer. One spring day, Lila was accepted into a prestigious art school in a nearby town. That moment was both one of celebration and nostalgia. Victor and Esther knew that their little girl was achieving her dreams, but they also felt the weight of seeing her go. The night before Lila moved to begin her studies, they hosted a special dinner in her honor. Victor and Esther prepared her favorite dishes and shared stories of their childhood, the life lessons they had both learned, and how much they loved her. At the end of the night, Lila moved, thanked them in tears. "Thank you for being my family, for giving me a home, for believing in myself when I didn't even do it myself. I'm not just an artist. I am who I am because of you." Esther and Victor looked at each other, their eyes reflecting the same love and gratitude, and they hugged Lila, knowing that even if she left for new horizons, she would always be their child and always have a home on Maple Street. After Lila left, Esther's house became a little quieter, but her heart was full of joy and pride. Both she and Victor kept in constant contact with Lila, receiving news of her achievements and her life in the city. Each Lila visit was a special event, an opportunity to catch up, share stories and memories, and celebrate the new steps in her path. Over the years, Maple Street became the gathering place for every Christmas and family celebration. Lila always returned home to be with Victor and Esther, who, seeing the woman she had become, knew that their story of love, strength, and second chances had borne fruit beautifully. Once a mystery, and a secret, Maple Street now represented a story of redemption, resilience, and most of all, love. Finally, Esther, in her golden years, contemplated with gratitude the life she had built with Victor and Lila. He knew that while life always brings change, the bond that bound them together was unbreakable and would continue to guide them through the rest of their days. At home, in the peace of Maple Street, she had found the purpose of her later years and had left a mark that would undoubtedly last for generations. Victor, over time, passed on to Lila the story of how Esther changed their lives and how the kindness of a woman gave them hope back in the darkest moments. To them, Maple Street wasn't just an address, it was a symbol, a testament to the power of compassion, the value of second chances, and the miracle of finding family in the most unexpected places. And so, the story of Esther, Victor, and Lila continued, engraved not only in their hearts, but also in the very soul of that small house on Maple Street, which became the eternal home of a family united by fate and love. Over the years, the tiny house on Maple Street became a meeting place not only for Esther, Victor, and Lila, but also for friends, neighbors, and distant family members who had heard about the warmth of the home. Every corner of the house was full of memories, from the paintings painted by Lila to the framed photos of special moments. The first Christmas together, the birthdays celebrated, and the impromptu dinners in the garden. As Lila progressed in her artistic career, her work began to gain recognition. Her paintings captured something unique, a mixture of melancholy and hope, that resonated deeply with those who admired them. It was at an exhibition in a major gallery in the city that Lila, proud of her roots and the influence Esther had had on her life, presented a series of paintings inspired by the moments she had shared on Maple Street. The works included scenes of the house, the garden, the small porch and the window, where once Esther had spent hours observing the street. On the opening night of the exhibition, Lila dedicated a few words to Esther and Victor. With her voice choked with emotion, she publicly thanked them for their unconditional love and for having given her the home that allowed her to flourish. My grandmother and father taught me that love can be found in the most unexpected places, and that true family is not always the one that gives us life, but the one that sustains us when we need it most. Those words echoed through the room, and Esther, with tears in her eyes, realized that the impact of her decision to help Victor and Lila had transcended in ways she never imagined. Victor, who attended the event with a mix of pride and nostalgia, also realized how much his life had changed since finding refuge in Esther's home. He remembered the days when he hid from the world, the times when he felt that the weight of his problems was too much. Yet there he was, standing next to his daughter, watching her shine in her own path. Lila's transformation from a girl full of uncertainty to a strong and talented woman was a reflection of the resilience they had both found in that home. Time continued to pass, and Lila's visits to Maple Street became sacred, a tradition she maintained no matter where she was. Esther, although already in an advanced stage of her life, was full of peace and satisfaction. Despite the years, she maintained her energy and joy, enjoying every moment with Victor and looking forward to Lila's return. Her life, which had once been filled with routine and silence, had morphed into a family love story that lit up every corner of her home. Over time, Esther began to prepare Victor and Lila for the day when she was no longer there. He spoke to them about the value of kindness, the importance of compassion, and how love could bring people together beyond any blood ties. He asked them to take care of the house on Maple Street, to keep the family spirit alive, and to never forget the lessons they had learned together. Victor and Lila, moved, promised to honor their legacy, knowing that this house would always be a sacred refuge for them and for future generations. One winter, as the Christmas lights lit up Maple Street, Esther calmly said goodbye to this world, surrounded by love and serenity. In her final moments, Victor and Lila stood by her side, holding her hands and reminding her how much they loved her. It was a peaceful goodbye, full of gratitude and without remorse. Esther left with the certainty that she had left a legacy that would transcend time, and her spirit would continue to inhabit every corner of that house that had become the center of her story of love and kindness. After his departure, Victor and Lila kept the promise they made to him alive. The Maple Street house became a place of celebration and remembrance, a place where family and friends gathered to remember Esther and the moments they had shared with her. Every year on the date of her birthday, Lila organized a small gathering to honor her memory, inviting the neighbors and friends who had been part of her life. They shared stories, laughed, and remembered the woman who, with her selfless kindness, had changed so many lives. Lila continued her artistic career, and every painting she created had a part of Esther in it. Her success was not only a reflection of her talent, but also of the influence and love that her grandmother had bestowed on her heart. Victor, who was now a grandfather to Lila's children, told his grandchildren the stories of how he and his little girl once found a home on Maple Street, thanks to a woman with a kind heart and an unwavering will. Over time, Esther's legacy became a family legend, a story of hope and redemption that was passed down from generation to generation. Maple Street was still a special place, a symbol of second chances and the power of love. And so, in the warmth of that home that was once a simple refuge, the family that Esther helped form continued to thrive, always remembering that, sometimes, the true miracle of life is found in the simple act of opening the door to someone in need. And so, the story of Esther, Victor and Lila became an eternal legacy, engraved on the walls of that house, in the lives they touched, and in the spirit of kindness that will always last in the hearts of those who were lucky enough to know her. Over the years, the Maple Street house remained in Lila's family, who, together with her children and grandchildren, cared for and preserved every corner as a sanctuary of love and memories. The generations that followed knew Esther through the stories that were told at each family gathering. Lila's paintings adorned the walls, many of them inspired by the memories shared with Esther and Victor, by the life lessons and values they had learned in that house. Victor, although already old, dedicated himself to transmitting the legacy of kindness and strength that Esther had sown. Over the years, his role as a father transformed into that of a grandfather and, eventually, a great-grandfather. Her grandchildren and great-grandchildren loved to hear the stories of her youth, and how Esther had changed the course of her life with an act of generosity that no one expected. The family grew, and each member inherited the compassion and sense of community that Esther had inspired. The Maple Street house, filled with photographs, paintings, and memorabilia, became a place where family and friends found comfort and togetherness. Years later, Lila decided to open the house to the community in honor of Esther, organizing events and art workshops for the young people of the neighborhood who came to learn and share in that place full of history and love. Once a simple refuge for a father and daughter, the house was now a community space that inspired and welcomed all those in need of a place of peace. Lila's children and grandchildren grew up with Esther's example as a model of generosity and how the family is built with acts of love. Every year, on the anniversary date of the day Victor and Lila arrived in Maple Street, the family would gather to remember Esther and celebrate her life. It was a day of gratitude, of remembering the power of second chances, and of honoring the one who, with a simple act of kindness, had changed the destiny of so many people. And so, the story of Esther, Victor, and Lila became a family legacy that transcended time and space. Maple Street ceased to be just a quiet street in a suburban neighborhood and became a symbol of hope, love, and perseverance. That home continued to welcome all who crossed its threshold, providing refuge, inspiration, and a reminder that sometimes the act of opening a door can be the beginning of a new and wonderful life. With each generation, Esther's memory was kept alive, and her story of love, compassion, and second chances was told over and over again, inspiring all who came to know her. Maple Street endured as a beacon of hope in the community, and in the heart of that family that had been born thanks to Esther, her legacy lived on, uniting lives and creating new stories, all thanks to the simple act of opening the door and offering help to those who needed it most. Over time, the Maple Street house became a place of inspiration for the entire community, a kind of community center where not only art events were held, but also meetings, wellness workshops, and relief programs for people in difficult situations. Lila's descendants, who had a deep respect and affection for Esther's legacy, pledged to keep her vision of love and service alive. The family, now extended and diverse, saw the house as a sacred place, and each member made a commitment to contribute in some way to preserving its history. The young people of the neighborhood, when they entered the house, felt the presence of the living history of Maple Street. Lila often lovingly recounted how Esther had welcomed them in the dark days of her childhood and shared the teachings she had received, emphasizing the importance of compassion, support, and the courage to open up to others without judgment. One summer, at a family gathering, Lila realized that her story was not only part of her past, but also a guide for her future. Inspired by Esther's life, she decided to write a book in her honor. In it, she told the story of how a brave and generous woman had changed the course of their lives, interweaving memories and details of those early days in the Maple Street house. The book, titled The House on Maple Street, A Home of Second Chances, became a tribute to Esther and an inspiring work for those who read it. Soon the book reached many other homes, conveying the message that love and kindness can flourish in the most unexpected moments. The publication had a profound impact, not only on the family, but also on the community beyond Maple Street. People from different places came to see the house and thanked Lila's family for maintaining a space dedicated to Esther's memory. Some shared their own stories of second chances and how compassion had transformed their lives. Others sought solace in Esther's example, finding in her story a reason to keep going. Over the years, the Maple Street house became a recognized symbol of hope and perseverance, not only in its community, but also in the hearts of all those who had learned about Esther's story through Lila's book. In each generation, Esther's legacy inspired new stories of generosity and love. And even though times and people changed, the message she had sown was still alive, growing and spreading, reminding everyone that the true value of life is in opening doors to others and building a home in the hearts of those we love. With every visit, every family gathering, and every new story that emerged in the house on Maple Street, the memory of Esther remained intact, a flame of love and kindness that would never be extinguished. Over the years, the house on Maple Street continued to be the refuge where the story of Esther, Victor, and Lila was intertwined with that of each person who came seeking comfort, inspiration, or a second chance. Lila's children and grandchildren preserved every corner of that home with love and devotion, keeping alive the memories and lessons of love that Esther had left them. Lila, already in the last stage of her life, continued to visit the house on Maple Street and fondly remember her childhood years, Esther's unconditional support, and the redemption she found with Victor. One day, sitting on the porch, Lila watched as her grandchildren and great-grandchildren ran around the garden, playing and laughing in the same place where she had found a home and a shelter. It was the most powerful symbol of Esther's legacy, a united family and a community that grew through love and generosity. Before her departure, Lila wrote a last letter to her children and grandchildren, in which she asked them to continue to take care of the house and always remember Esther's example. He spoke to them about the power of compassion and how a simple decision to help someone in need could change the destiny of many lives. "This home is so much more than a house," he wrote. "It is a place where love transformed hardship into hope, and where the generous heart of one woman gave us a family. My wish is that they never stop believing in the power of love and second chances." On the day Lila departed peacefully, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, the family gathered at the Maple Street home to remember her life and celebrate the legacy she and Esther had left. Laughter, tears, and hugs filled every corner as a tribute to the love and gratitude that had been born from that story. Lila's descendants kept their promise, making the house a place open to all, where Esther's teachings continued to inspire and where life and unity were celebrated. Over time, the house on Maple Street became an official community center in Esther's honor. Activities, workshops, and events were organized that supported those facing challenges, providing them with a safe place and a space to heal and rebuild. The story of Esther, Victor, and Lila became a legend for the neighborhood, a tale that was told over and over again, reminding everyone that kindness, however simple, has the power to change the world. And so the house on Maple Street continued as a beacon of hope and love, a place where generations found comfort, strength, and unity. Esther's essence was still alive, shining brightly in every person who crossed her threshold, reminding them that in the end, we all have the power to make this world a kinder and fairer place, just by opening the door to those who need a home. This was Esther's eternal legacy, a story of second chances that generation after generation continued to flourish in the hearts of all those who ever came to the house on Maple Street.